Still waiting.
I forgot to grease my head. Oh, well.
It's sent now, and it's live.
Okay.
We're live now.
Okay. I'm trying to remember, does the live stream link go out to everybody immediately, or do I need to?
We're
It
live
does.
now. Yes.
Okay. I mean, so once I click it on when I have the link, everybody who's a
Mark,
subscriber will get it.
it's live now. It's on. Yeah.
It's okay. I like being a total idiot about this stuff. I'm proud. All right. Let me put this in.
This is how everyone's gonna see the beginning
Good.
of the stream.
Good.
So
Love it.
just letting you know.
Okay, so I um
We should have guitar tuning noises somewhere around here. Down, 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 down. Bow, bow, down.
Okay. And John, oh yeah, open up the Radio Warner in the YouTube too, so you can see. There we go. Folks already complaining. Where are you? Here we are. But I ain't listening. Okay. I think it's working. I hope it's working. It seems to be working. Is this? Oh, wait. No. Do I have to, Brendan?
You're
Do I
live.
have?
Yeah, you're on. You're on live. Hello.
So I don't need
everyone.
to add the title and all that stuff right now.
No, just say hello and welcome
Okay.
to Radio World.
3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to another episode of Radio Warner. The date today is March 7th, 2024, and this is episode 431. And as you can tell, it is our second live stream, and that's why we are such fucking pros at this. Anyway, I'm Mark Ames.
I mean, we've only done like 430 episodes. How would we know?
I am a dinosaur and I'm prayed. All right. Of course, I am with the Warner himself, John Dolan, aka Gary Brecherj, because you are now in Montenegro, right?
Yeah, we're in Montenegro. It's been a hard trip getting here. We had to make the trip for visa reasons. We've made a lot of trips for that kind of reason, but I can recommend an actual pleasant travel experience if you take the ferry from Bari in Italy to Durrës, or as in Italian, Durazzo. It's overnight. It's pretty pleasant. You've got these bunk beds, and there's no room. It's a classic stateroom of slapstick shipboard comedies, but it doesn't matter. In fact, it's kind of comforting to be in a tight bunk bed on a ship. The ship goes on without you, and you just vaguely hear the engine going, and it's like a benevolent universe, if you can imagine that. It goes on without you, and it takes you where you want to go.
Well, okay. On the one hand, as I recall from Erdogan Pizza and your columns, well, there was a description. Maybe you were in one of your not so good moods at the time, but the description of the Aegean was shallow, dead, and full of sponges.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's a horrible sea. And I know a lot of Italians agree with this. It's very shallow. It's got rivers pouring into it from all over, and it didn't start out that deep. It's a little better when it feeds into the Mediterranean proper to the south, but the northern Aegean is horribly shallow. But that's something you experience when you try to swim in it or run in the water, which is what I tried to do the first time in Durrës, because I have a bad knee. I can't run on land, so I wanted to run in the water. Looked like a good idea because it's shallow, but what I didn't count on was the sponges. There are lots and lots of sponges in the Aegean, and I'm sorry, the Adriatic. I don't even have.
Oh shit! So it's not the Aegean; it's the
No,
Adriatic. Of course. What am I saying? The Aegean. Look at me.
yeah,
Not the Aegean, which is on the other side.
right.
The Adriatic. Yes.
Oh, it's a traffic
Okay.
jam
Three,
of
two,
ocean too.
one. Hello and welcome to Radio Warner. Can't
Yeah. So
edit that
okay,
out.
the Adriatic. I'm talking about the Adriatic, which is between
Yes.
Italy and Albania, and the problem with it is that they've carved out some channels for the ferries, so that's fine. But when you try to swim in it, as I did, or run in it, first of all, you're not clear how a new state like Albania is, how much it's getting in the way of European water purification grants, and that makes you a little nervous. But beyond that, there's the fact that if you try to run in it, you meet the sponges. And I mean, look, I'm one of those people who worry about sharks in pools. So I mean, I like to snorkel, but that doesn't mean I'm not terrified every second. And these sponges are everywhere, and you can't run in the water without stepping on them. And they're about the size and texture of a human head.
Whoa,
so it
God.
feels like you're stepping on human heads all the way. And probably there have been a lot of mass executions all along this coast. In fact, I know there have.
Yeah.
So it really feels like you're stepping on heads, and it kind of ruins your enthusiasm for a good workout. And so after a couple of times of trying that, yeah, I had a bad Adriatic experience. But to cross the Adriatic at night in a ferry which is lulling you to sleep with constant rhythm is a very different experience.
The other thing that comes to mind, I mean, it's hard for me to imagine a ferry crossing a body of water, sleeping on it, being comforting, given your many episodes of gastrointestinal bouts. And just thinking of the Celine novel Death on the Installment Plan and the famous crossings of the English Channel where everybody's vomiting and they start grabbing each other by the face and vomiting into each other's mouths and so on. And talk about
well, that's true. I mean, seasickness is funny in cartoons, but once you've had the real thing, it's not funny anymore. It's really nightmarish. And on a trip to the Farallon Islands, which was ironically a birthday present, I had the worst seasickness I've ever had. And I wrote a poem about it.
Look, a tufted puffin. I still remember that line.
Yeah, that's what they were crying out, the bastards, while I was dying. And that, though, is the Farallons. Very choppy water.
Yes.
Famously choppy.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, though, I was stuck in a boat on Vancouver Island, somewhere off Victoria. And I had to stay on the boat all day because Catherine had a job in town and I couldn't get a job. I couldn't get a job anywhere. And I had to stay on the boat because we had a dog that had some abandonment issues, and it was a Great Dane, and it had very big lungs, and it would start using them if you tried to row away from the boat. The boat could only be reached by a rowboat, and as soon as you got a couple of lengths away, that dog would start howling. And people in that community, basically the scum of the earth, would not have hesitated to kill the dog if it really bothered them. So I had to stay on the boat all day and then take the dog with me to the shore in the dinghy to pick Catherine up, which is a long way of leading up to the fact that there were some wild storms on that boat, but something happened. I never got seasick. What I got was I experienced oneness with nature, and I understood as the boat rocked up and down and up and down. I experienced the screams of the crows and realized the crows are as terrified as I am, and they know perfectly well they're mortal, and they're screaming because they're screaming. It's not just the sound they happen to make. So I had plenty of that, but I never got seasick. I don't know why.
Okay, real quickly here, we have an issue, which is that nobody got the link because we fucked this up.
Oh.
And hold on a second. Join to unlock. Just now, join to unlock paid for by members. Okay. I don't know what the motherfucking fuck is going on. Yeah. Just now. Hold on. Yes. I see. Hold on. And I don't know how to get it. Oh, so you're supposed to like schedule it. So that we screwed up. And then 123. Oh, don't schedule it. Okay. Now add the following requirements to your post before continuing: a live stream and a title. Why isn't there a live stream and a title? There should be a live stream. Oh, there we go. There's a live stream and the title. Radio War Nerd. P number 431. Live stream. Erdogan pizza. Okay. I think now I think it's on. Jesus Christ. So we are
none of that was recorded, or
there was, I think, recorded.
You're streaming live.
Yeah, we're streaming, but not through Patreon. I got a ton of complaints.
Patreon, right?
Yeah, because I did have to post it. I thought I did.
Well, you're still going.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. All right. So now it seems like, okay, hold on. All right. You have been recorded live. Yeah, we can hear you. Okay. All right. So I think a lot of people are right now through the YouTube portal, and now it is going through the Patreon portal too. So I'm going to say this for those of you who are just joining us now, because we are such doofuses at tech and we're still figuring this out. This is our second live stream. This is episode 431, and we're doing a live stream about Erdogan Pizza, John's new book, the collection of sort of travel / anti-travel / gastrointestinal stories from newsletters going back in the 8+ years of Radio War Nerd. Anyway, we started talking, and when we realized that this wasn't going through the Patreon site. So now I think we're also live through the Patreon site as well as through YouTube. Thank you to everyone who messaged us in the last 10 minutes saying, what's the link? So, right. So anyway, welcome everybody who hadn't joined us yet. Hope this is working properly. And hope you guys can, everyone's like, found it. Okay. It's on Patreon now. Yes. There are people who are pros at this live streaming business and whatever the kids are into. We ain't those people, but we aim to be there. We aim to please. Right. So we were talking about vomiting. Vomiting and seasickness. And yeah, I mean, the San Francisco Bay Area is prime vomit producing, seas. I mean, I can still remember the worst seasickness of my life on the bay. We had these neighbors. This neighbor was sort of this, before my parents got divorced and we had to drop down a few notches. These really wealthy neighbors who the dad had been a painter and ran a painting business in East San Jose, and they were from East San Jose, and a great guy, the father. And he wound up getting a contract for like Hewlett Packard or something like that and made a ton of money. Wound up it was like the East San Jose version of Beverly Hillbillies. Like they got extremely rich. They were so rich, they built a second 2-story house behind their house just as a playhouse for the
Wow.
kids with like a pinball machine and billiards tables. And they packed in a bunch of liquor there that we got into when we were way too young to. And anyway, and he wound up getting a yacht. And so I went on their yacht and wound up vomiting all over their like 40-foot yacht on the bay. And I just never understood why people wanted to go out in the bay again after that. So
you stayed in the Bay and still got
oh
seasick.
yeah. In fact, what I remember most about this was we went out not too far, and he kind of wanted to show off his boat. It was a really nice boat, I don't remember that much. And I just remember that I was sick and I was complaining, and then I started vomiting, and I could see the shore, and we were so close. But for whatever reason, they couldn't dock for
Yeah.
another 2 hours, and it was fucking hell. Yeah.
Yeah, I had the same experience on the Farallon cruise. Like, we got close to the Farallon Islands, but first of all, it wasn't downtown San Francisco, it was the Farallones. And second, the one thing I remembered about the Farallones is that there's a flourishing seal colony, which provides a very comfortable income in terms of food to a population of great white sharks. And I wanted desperately to just dive off that boat and swim to the island, but I kind of didn't want to at the same time.
Yeah. Although they would have ended the seasickness pretty quickly
That's
with a
true.
couple
Yeah.
chomps.
Well, yeah, I could have just borrowed a flare pistol or something for that.
Right. So we're going to talk about Erdogan pizza and travel and books. And I mean, before we start anything, I want to read if we're going to talk about travel in any sense whatsoever, travel, war, literature, the great epigraph to The Dog of the South by Charles Portis, the epigraph from Sir Thomas Browne that I want to read here. Even animals near the classes of plants seem to have the most restless motions. And I love the spelling because it's the old 18th century, like restless is spelled Restlesse. The summer worm of ponds and plashes make a long waving motion. The hairworm seldom lies still. He that would behold a very anomalous motion may observe it in the tortile and tiring strokes of gnatworms. In other words, like motion is life. But I have to say, your first book, Pleasant Hell, there's not a lot of travel in that book. It pretty much takes place, except for the introduction, it takes place on like a 3-stop segment of the East Bay line of the BART train, pretty much,
Most of which ends up in my fetid bedroom.
Yes.
A
lot of traveling in the bedroom. Yes.
Yeah.
Between the bedroom and the washing machine, as I recall, but the laundry room.
Yeah.
So where do you want to start today? Talking about,
well, there was a question by a listener who has classic Radio Warner taste, like asking, what was your worst gastrointestinal experience? Somebody who really knows what's what, and a question to savor. And I would have to say, it's not quite in the Radio Warner years. It was much earlier, when I had these moments of big hopes when I was young, and for me, young is like 30s, because everything started very late for me, and I didn't have any adventures really when I was young, proper. But when I was about 28, I went to Paris, and I was going to learn French properly, and I was slowly starting to realize after a few days in France, I didn't have the money to stay in Alliance Française for any length of time. So what I did was hunker down in this very minimal off-season dorm room in the very south of Paris, the Cité Universitaire, and paid them for a couple of months in advance and stayed there and walked the length of Paris and back every day, did 600 push-ups a day. I was really disciplined because I was infatuated with somebody and I wanted to come back in perfect shape and make a good impression, which, actually resulted in me being told, "You look so small." But anyway, so I was starving, and I starved for 2 months, and then I went to Germany, walking the last part of the way, and ended up meeting some friends there, and we ate a lot of sausage and potatoes, and that was fine until I got to the train back to Paris, where I was taking a flight out, and I had planned to walk to Orly Airport from the Paris metro, which is quite a walk.
Yes.
And that was when that meal started making itself felt, and it made itself.
The Germans made a breakout in France.
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Franco-Prussian War Part 2. Okay.
Paris, it wasn't burning, but it was kind of making a breakthrough for sure. And so at first there was this under construction urinal in the Paris train station, and I was desperate. I just had to look around and void the contents of my intestines into this half-constructed urinal, and thank God nobody came by. And then I walked through the night about, I don't know, whatever it is, like 15 miles at least to Orly Airport. And it was all suburbs, which was kind of lucky because the whole long night, I had to stop and find a nice quiet spot every few meters. And I arrived there with severely aching cheeks, nether cheeks. And I was terrified because I might not have enough money for the pay toilets at the airport. So that, I think, was my most epic gastrointestinal adventure of all time. But in terms of recent sicknesses, and it's a really interesting topic, I admit, the most interesting was a very bad fever in Kuwait that might have been malaria. I don't know. But I just lay on the sofa and sweated. And eventually, like in a Philip K. Dick novel somehow, two forces, which might have been brain hemispheres, I don't know, coalesced in my head and were fighting, were banging at each other. And I couldn't stop it. And it was perfectly real, but I was, I guess, in some kind of delusion or daze. And it was agony. It wasn't at all that one was good and one was bad. They were both bad, but they were fighting forever. And I eventually slept after like 14 hours and it went away. But that's definitely the most travel-related illness I've had, because, we were in Kuwait, and we were in one of the poor parts of Kuwait where they shove the foreign workers. And it's not a very healthy place. And anything could happen to you there. Somebody would take your place. So it's a scary thing to be sick there.
I remember one of the things you telling me about it when you were in Kuwait was, even the cats are filthy here. I mean, in that part of Kuwait, like cats are supposed to be clean, and then they're clean when they can be, but like in a bad place, which I guess
they have worms hanging out of their noses.
Ooh, yeah.
Which is not pleasant.
No. Yeah, I'm just remembering one time I went with some Russians, a whole bunch of Russians to Vietnam for vacation through the exile, sort of our Russian workers and their friends. And I was annoying people. I think like they seemed to be annoyed with me at some point. And I think it was because I spent all my time going from pharmacy to pharmacy looking for codeine and very focused on anything with codeine. And I found finally I don't know, these like pills that had like, 800 milligrams of liver killing acetaminophen and like 2 milligrams of codeine. And so I would pop like entire boxes of that. And it caught up with me. And we were going to the airport. We were at the airport and I had a complete explosion. I mean, from wherever things could explode from. And I remember crawling out, like I thought I was going to die and there was no way I was going to make the flight. And I told them, and that was the first time especially all the Russians, particularly the women, were like, they went from being very annoyed with me and having contempt, whatever, to just utterly sympathizing with me. They're like, you're so adorable, not adorable, but like so sympathetic when you're sick and dying. And then,
You should be sick
yeah,
all the time.
yeah, exactly. And yeah, I can still remember. I mean, I looked like absolute hell, and I'm sure I did some damage to my organs, which will show up later, from all that. But you got to
Yeah.
do what you got to do.
Well, in Canada, they supposedly have a way of straining that stuff,
Yes,
but I don't know if I trust that either.
I did the straining thing, and it you put lemon and a
Yeah.
cheesecloth, and it doesn't. It's bullshit.
Yeah.
You still vomit. Your kidneys still punish you
Yeah.
for it. But this is a family podcast about war and death and vomiting and diarrhea and other gastrointestinal issues. So yeah, John, let's get back to Albania real quickly, and
Yeah.
let's talk a bit about Albania, and then we want to talk a bit about the book and get to any questions that people might have as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, we were in Albania.
Sorry, real quickly. Brady says, yeah, not to brag, but I threw up on the street after a Radio Warner meetup in New York City. Bummed too many cigarettes. That's fun. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So we were in Albania for about a week in Durrës, and the first thing I want to say is Erdogan Pizza is still there. The actual pizza parlor that the book was named after on the streets of Durrës was still there and quite near our hotel. Its logo is changed. It's got a sort of pink logo with a crown in it. I don't know if that means Erdogan is, king of Turkey or the new sultan or what, but it's de-emphasized its green roots. So good for that, even if they did try to run me over in their scooter. And Durrës otherwise had a big earthquake, which was kind of interesting news a few years ago. I think a few years after we left, because how a lot of Balkan architecture is. It's very much get rich quick DIY stuff. Usually the upper story is left out if it can be, because you don't want to get taxed on the upper story until you have to. And it's all concrete, and basically it's one of those parts of the world where everything can be solved with enough concrete, and the reinforcement and other things not so important. There was a big earthquake and a lot of things came down, and apparently hundreds of people in Durrës died. So I'm kind of glad selfishly glad we were out of the way by then. But
yeah, 6.4 magnitude in a place like that, things are going to collapse.
Yeah, they did. Apparently they collapsed. And the other thing about Durrës now is that thanks to Radio Warner, we could afford like a decent hotel, and we saw a lot of really prosperous people. And the interesting thing about the Balkans is that you get a lot of weird stuff about birth rate. Like supposedly Serbia has a very low birth rate, but it's more that poor people can't have children. And it seems like rich people have a lot of children. Like there were kids running around all over the place in this hotel. And they were flaunting their wealth in a lot of ways. Your car is your wealth. The hotel you're staying at is your wealth. The fact that you're just taking it easy by a pool is your wealth. And it seemed like the kids are too. That's another way of being wealthy. And I don't know how they're wealthy, but if you get foreigners, they'll say, everybody's mafia. I have no idea. But there's a sense of big money here, but it absolutely doesn't percolate down to most people there. And as usual in places like this, there's a giant difference between the young of the upper class and the old and the lower class in terms of height. Like young, rich Albanians are 6.5 feet. Old, poor Albanians are 5.5 feet. I mean, that's a generalization, but it kind of works out that way. So then we came on through, I swear to God, like 50 miles of mountain territory, which is entirely crowded with DIY second homes with the rebar sticking up through the first floor. And we came to Montenegro through the mountains. Very difficult trip. But the interesting thing about Montenegro now is apparently that's one of the places Russians and Ukrainian went. 1 in 6 people in the cities of Montenegro is Ukrainian or Russian, just as Lily Lynch said in Serbia, the cities of Serbia are full of Russians. She stressed the Russians, but here apparently it's both Ukrainian and Russian. And apparently they get along. I mean, if what you have in common is you don't want to fight, then it's pretty easy to go far away and not fight. So there was a quote from a Russian couple staying in Montenegro. We don't have any troubles with the Ukrainians. They understand us and we understand them. We understand their situation. We understand why they are here. The environment is just friendly. And the article goes on to say that that's because of a shared Orthodox culture, which I highly doubt. It's more like, same kind of city, same kind of architecture. And that's...
They're very similar. No, they are very similar culturally. I mean, there's a lot of people who don't want to acknowledge that now, but I mean, I never saw, to me, they were, and I think to most people, including to Ukrainians and Russians, until after Maidan and certainly after the war started, they always considered themselves very close, unless you went out to Lvov. I mean, I remember even visiting Lvov with some friends a couple times in sort of the early 2000s. And even though they were it was very similar to provincial Russia to me, like a sort of, mid-sized provincial Russian city. It looked different. It definitely, like, it had a totally different look because of the Polish and Austro-Hungarian architecture. But the people, the culture, I could tell stories. It was the exact same, except that anybody you met, although they would eventually speak Russian with you, there was a lot of real hatred of Russians there. And it was bizarre because they seemed so close. But, like Serbs and Croats, I guess, to some degree, when you talk about the far west of Ukraine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the other interesting thing about the city, and this is, I think, a familiar feature for anybody who's lived in the post-Soviet bloc, is the way civic issues and zoning get worked out or don't get worked out. Like the place we ended up staying is back of the harbor. And the only place for the city to expand is back of the harbor because Montenegro is a coastal place. And back there, there seem to be rules within a very narrow seaside downtown. Like there are sidewalks. The sidewalks are roughly the same size in most places, even though there's a lot of DIY stuff. Because I'm sure you know, Mark, like one thing you learn here is you better watch your step. You don't you don't ever take the sidewalk for granted, or every step can change. Somebody might have decided it would be fun to build a 2-foot ramp to their house or something.
Yeah.
But that gets worse as you get further away. And up in the hills where we are now, it kind of reminded me of California in the boom years in a sad way, because everything is private. The streets are essentially private. The streets are essentially driveways. They're driveways built to some big house that some rich person has bought, and they stop at that house, and there are no sidewalks to that house. There are occasional sidewalks for a little while, and then somebody who was a libertarian bought the next house, and the sidewalk absolutely ends. But the street ends, and then if somebody wants to build beyond that, they either build another stretch of street or a different street in a different direction, and you have the feeling this is not going to work, but probably will work. I mean, the suburbs of LA work in a kind of way. You know, it's not nice, but they work.
So, quick thing about Montenegro. I was just remembering, actually, now we're talking about it. The first big story I worked on after I had to leave Russia after the Kremlin, shut down the exile, was this big story for The Nation magazine on John McCain's campaign ties. It's funny because a lot of Russiagate kind of kept referencing this article I did, even though I was so anti-Russiagate. But John McCain's campaign ties to the Kremlin. And the point of our article was what a hypocrite he was, because when he ran in 2008, he ran as, this is before things flipped between Republicans and Democrats, but he ran as the let's get a Cold War going with Russia. Putin is the most evil, dangerous man in the world. And Barack Obama was running a sort of, it's time to move past this neocon stuff and we can find a way to work with him. That's how things were. It seems already so long ago. So anyway, and I had some information that McCain and or his campaign manager, Rick Davis, were in Montenegro and might have gone on Oleg Deripaska's yacht. Oleg Deripaska was and still is, tight with Putin and an oligarch, made his big nut in aluminum, particularly, although he's branched out into a lot of other businesses, but is basically an aluminum magnate. And what we did know was that McCain's campaign manager had also contracted with Deripaska to try to get him an American visa, because the Americans had pulled his visa sometime in the mid-2000s because of his alleged ties with organized crime, and because he was apparently such a a-hole to State Department people when they started to question him about it. And he pissed people off, and so he had a block on it. And so he paid McCain's people to get to McCain to try to have McCain use his influence to get Deripaska his visa again. And his campaign manager, as I said, who was also a lobbyist, is named Rick Davis. Rick Davis was the co-owner of a famous lobbying firm called Manafort Davis. That is to say, Paul Manafort and Rick Davis. And I mean, this is actually one of the big reasons, one of many reasons why I was so skeptical of Russiagate, because I knew that these guys were just out for money, that they weren't being controlled by Putin, that they were just hypocrite scumbags. And, if Russiagate was real, then based on my reporting, it would mean that John McCain was also being, that Putin had a P tape on McCain and was controlling McCain, which was preposterous. But anyway, so we had this information that he had apparently gone on a yacht. McCain had with Rick Davis on Deripaska's yacht because a lot of Russians were really moving in big into Montenegro in let's say from sort of 2005 through I don't know which year it maybe pulled back. Because for a lot of rich Russians, it was a way, it was thought that Montenegro was going to enter the EU, that it was, and the fact that it had broken away from Serbia meant that you could influence Montenegro more. And Deripaska went and bought their big aluminum plant, and I think even like the power plant. So Deripaska pretty much owned the place. I mean, it's a small country, 700,000 people.
You can be Mr. Burns. Easy.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Leave them in the dark.
So I used my Russian and my little knowledge of Serbian to kind of go through the Montenegrin media. And I spent all this time and I found something which I found like some local kind of travel yacht journalist, a Montenegrin, writing in Serbian about McCain having visited. And I got in contact with her and with somebody who headed an NGO and wound up getting an actual photograph of McCain that she had taken of McCain looking a lot like Biden, actually, like very kind of slumped over, very gray. But, he was as old as he looks here. It's nothing like Biden today. This is 2006, I believe it was. Yeah. Shows him walking up the ramp. Rick Davis is in front of him. Rick Davis is shaking some suave looking dude's hand who's like wearing a polo shirt. And behind him, sort of hiding just behind him, is some beautiful looking young woman. And what it turned out, it wasn't Deripaska's yacht. It turned out that this was the yacht of, let me get his name right here, Raffaello Folieri, and his girlfriend at the time, the famous Anne Hathaway, the actress. That's who that was. Yeah. And he was going on Raffaele Folieri's yacht. Now, at the time that I was writing this story, Folieri was serving a 5-year jail term for mass fraud. He was Folieri was actually a big donor to the Clinton Foundation, the Clinton Global Initiative. I mean, when you really start getting into, you're looking for one thing and you get another. You just get into just the fact that other people live so differently from the rest of us, just so differently, and they're all just thick as thieves when it comes down to it.
Yeah, it really is Chinatown. Wow.
Yeah. And Anne Hathaway famously broke up with him. She complained that she'd been fooled by him. And I don't know whatever happened to Raffaele Folieri since then, but he was just a complete swindler, like an absolute, Bush era classic swindler guy who ran pyramid schemes, and then it all collapsed. And there was Rick Davis, his campaign manager, McCain's campaign manager, shaking his hand, and McCain sort of shuffling up the ramp into the yacht. Like, what is just a rotten job that must have been. Yeah. And side story, it was a very annoying story. So I went through a lot to find the story, and it was a very funny story, and I was able to run it on like the Exiled blog, Exiled Online, right when I came back. And MSNBC very quickly, this is when MSNBC was just, and what's her name? Russiagate, Jesus Christ, my brain,
Rachel Maddow.
Rachel Maddow. Yeah. Was just starting out, and they wanted me to come on, but my co-author who did anything on this guy, Ari Berman, heard it because he was in the Nation office and I wasn't. I was out. Heard that she wanted us on, or whoever wrote this on, and Ari just said, I can do it, and he went on. Yeah, he went on, and I don't care now, but at the time I was really disgusted. Like, okay, this is what America is going to be like, because we'd had our own media, and I hadn't had to deal with stupid
Yeah.
shit like that, people kind of stealing your stuff and so on. But anyways, yeah, that's my little Montenegro story. I never went there. I spent a lot of time in Serbia, but never made it out to Montenegro.
It's a pretty nice place, I'd say.
Yeah.
But don't do it by road from Durrës the way we did. That's an awful lot of mountain curves. And the thing I find about mountain curvy roads is that the first 5 curves you say, "Oh, isn't that beautiful?" And then the 6th time you say, "Oh, isn't that? Oh, God damn it! How long
Yeah.
is this going to take?" And eventually, you just don't look at all anymore.
My memory of traveling from Albania in 2000, I went with Bill Gould and we met in Tirana, and then we took one of those buses over the mountain passes around a lot of curves. And just my memory of it is every curve had at least 2 bouquets and a picture of somebody. It's like a lot of people died on a lot of those corners. And it sure didn't seem to slow the sort of microbuses, they call them. It didn't seem to slow the driver down. It was sort of like, well, fate decided.
Yeah.
And, we're going to test the fate again. Yeah.
And if we got to go, let's make it fatal instantly. Let's not linger
Yes.
around in
Yeah.
the hospitals for a while.
Yeah. Which makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. So let's
So
see.
we go to the questions.
Yeah. So let's see if there's any questions here. Because I'm so bad.
I've been passed a question.
Oh, okay.
Jesse DeStasio. Oops, I don't know if I should I mention names?
Yeah, it's all right.
Okay. Jesse. Right. Brendan, can you cut the last name, please?
Oh, there's nothing to cut because it's live, but we can do it later.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Whoops.
It's all right.
Sorry.
It's all right.
Jesse asks, do you have a favorite place to travel to? Mark, you?
I'd have to say Thailand. I mean, but it was easier to get there from Russia, and I would go there, when I could. Just the people are great, the food is great, the weather's great. Like, it's just where you want to get away to. I don't know. It's so remote, so beyond me. My wife and I talk about it a lot now, but it just seems impossible to reach. We have with kids and expenses. I mean, it's just very expensive and not easy traveling with kids. Even if you're just going to Legoland, it already takes about 5 years off your life. But
oh yeah, you went to some water park with the kids in Canada, right? And it was hell on earth.
It was.
I want to go to Mount Splashmore experience.
Very much. Yeah, I mean, for the kids, it was great. And it's just for the kids, it's great, and that's great, And I want to make as many great memories for them as I can, And it just reminds me of, like, if you've ever had an old dog and a sort of puppy dog, or an old cat and a kitten, the old dog that you've had for so long, and he was always like, I'm number one, I'm the only guy here. And then he's getting into old age. He's like, well, I'm settling into my golden years, and that's okay because I'm here with my owners, and everything's gonna be great. And then suddenly you bring a puppy in, the puppy's like, and the puppy just sends the older dog to its grave, like at warp speed, biting the dog's ears constantly. Come on, let's play. Like, and I feel like that older dog with my kids, and the older dog never bites the puppy. The older dog is respectful and wants the puppy to have a good puppyhood. But the older dog goes to the grave pretty quickly, and it sort of feels like that sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think about that too. It's like, it would have to be someplace by the sea, because I'm not very good at snorkeling, and I'm completely terrified of the ocean, but I do like snorkeling. And I don't know. We went to an island in Fiji once where you arrive by boat, and you leave by boat, and it's very far from anywhere. And all there is to do there is snorkel and eat. And it was called Thangalai, which is, I don't know, it's a great place. It's run by the Methodist Church, I think, which is a big institution apparently in Fiji, and it was like being out of the world for a while, and that's a great relief when you can manage it. A lot of places don't achieve escape velocity, as Portis would say, but that one really did.
Mm. Somebody points out here that took my advice and started reading the Limonov biography by Manuel Carrere, which the reason why that book, I don't know if you read it, John. I mean, in a way, we don't have to read it, but I did out of curiosity because
I read part of it, and then
Yeah.
I don't know, I got alienated.
Yeah, I mean, it's what it is it's a good introduction to Limonov because he just he rewrites Limonov's with respect, Limonov's books, but when the I comes into it, he's a really unpleasant, unlikable I, virtuous and full of shit and so on. So you kind of have to
you
stomach
can't
that.
be completely surprised by Limonov if you're going to write about him. You have to, like who's the French poet who said, hypocrite, my fellow. You have to admit that, like you're as prurient in your interest as anybody else, and it didn't seem to do that.
No, and I remember when it came out, Limonov asked me what I thought of it, and I told him that my view of it was I thought it was great in the sense that it introduced people in a simple way to English language audiences and reintroduce them to French. I mean, I remember the first time I went to Europe, my first ever traveling, speaking of traveling, which was 1991. I went to sort of backpacked around with my girlfriend then at in France and Spain, and then we went to Czechoslovakia, and wherever we went, there were interviews with Limonov. Was like a kind of a celebrity in Western Europe. Still, it ended, I think, shortly after that. But he was kind of a celebrity. He seemed to be wherever we went, there'd be some big full page article, and they loved the fact that he was a bad boy of literature and interesting. But yeah, I think then after that, he crossed too many lines for the Western audiences, and so no one read him anymore. And so this book reintroduced him, I think, to a lot of people. It's having read a lot of his books in Russian, I was familiar with a lot of it, and it was kind of nice to see them sort of rewritten. There's a movie that's going to be coming out. I think it's in post-production. I think Kirill Serebryandnikov, I think, is the director. And there's I can't remember his name now, a fairly famous British actor who's playing Limonov. And it should be coming out sometime in the next year or so.
I want to know what they do to the young Limonov of Podrostok Savienko era. They better get that right. But okay, I have another question here for both of us. What Raiders draft made you most sick, Mark?
Well,
Pickens.
I know that people will want to say, the hell's his name?
Jamarcus.
Yeah, Jamarcus. But for me, it's another Mark forever. Mark Wilson, wasn't that his name? The guy from BYU.
Yeah, I was going to say Mark Wilson too.
Yeah. Worst. Like no excuse. Just it was picking Mark Wilson when Al Davis's luck turned. And they never quite got it back again. They did have that brief period, a couple of years. What was it? Sort of the turn of the century with Rick Gannon.
Yeah.
That just
who had no fanfare. Who was?
I know.
He just came up. That's why every time they drafted a quarterback, I got depressed because it just didn't seem to pay for the Raiders. I mean, Mark Wilson, for example. I'll tell you what Davis liked about it. As somebody said, I was watching a Raiders game in Kip's Pizza Place in Berkeley, and somebody yelled out, "Ah, not Mark Wilson. He throws punts," and that's exactly what he did, and that's what
Yes.
Davis admired. Look at that! Look at the physics of that
Yes.
giant arm. But so what?
Yeah. It was like it was like a ballistic missile that could travel the entire length of the field. And I'm sure he just thought, well, we'll find somebody fast enough who will just always get to that ball. Wilson was pound for pound the worst professional quarterback I've ever seen. I hated him. He couldn't even run. He couldn't do anything. And he had this kind of bird-like face with this mustache. It was just very punchable. It was when I started thinking I don't really like the Raiders much anymore. And I still have a soft spot for them, and I still get worked up for them foolishly because I don't know. It's an old habit.
I still get excited on draft day. I mean, I
Yeah.
get excited for the lead up to their draft. I mean,
Yeah.
a
But
friend
they've
of the
had-
show, Ken and Dan, said his brother once said, I want to be in suspended animation and just wake me up for draft day every year. I suspect that a few thousand years later, they might have to say, no, there is no more NFL draft. And then he could just say, all right, don't wake me up anymore. But yeah, I understand that.
So somebody here asked, do you have any other travel logs you enjoy reading and would recommend? Because, as I see John's book, I mean, it's a travel book, but an anti-travel book. And it's the unlikeliest travel book because John was never like, I want to travel the world and sample the cuisines and, talk to get the local flavor. But I was kind of thinking about this actually before we started this, like of great, I don't know what I would consider travel books and ones that maybe influenced you and me. I mean, the first that comes the obvious mind, but we don't have to talk about this really, is just Homer. I mean, Homer wrote travel war books, right? I mean, the Odyssey is a travel book, it's just that you meet like Cyclops and the Sirens rather than the pizza parlor and the vomit.
Well, to me, I mean, it would be fiction, and it would be science fiction or fantasy, and I don't know if people like that. There's a lot of strange snobbery, ill-founded snobbery going around. But I would say Jack Vance's episodic books are the most wonderful travel narratives I know, because every few pages he invents a new culture, which Kugel or the other protagonist suddenly enters. And he has so much imagination that this new culture has any feature he wants very convincingly.
Yes.
Very difficult to do. People don't know how difficult that is to do.
He makes it look easy, effortless. Yeah.
So I would guess that. Just read the Kugel books or
Chash, the City of the Chash.
City of the Chash.
It's just literally a guy, it starts off like a kind of simple sci-fi magazine and then just what's it, Rafe, or I can't remember his name now. And he just sort of drops from the sky literally onto this planet. And then it's just worlds opening up after that. It's amazing. That's what the line that you would repeat a lot. Humans are plastic, or isn't that where
men are as plastic as wax, but he means it in the people sense.
Yeah. The great line.
Because that's the series of 4 novels about the planet Shai, Tschai, and they involve different species to which the humans of the planet are sort of apprenticeships. And it's one of this species that's based on samurai Japanese culture, if the Japanese were cheetahs. That's all I can say. They're feline samurai, but not samurai pizza cats, okay? They're very strange. And for example, at some point they stop hunting for the protagonist and his friends just because some point has been reached in their culture in which they're no longer of interest. They still have a grudge, but it doesn't matter anymore. And there are other species like the chash who are just big bugs, big beetles who have gone decadent. And it's very funny to see decadent beetles. They kind of don't hang out much except in their little palaces, and they sort of torture people who come by. But yeah, an endless, fecund, somewhat satanic imagination is what defines those. But I know that I know a lot of war books are essentially travel books, like Sergeant in the Snow, a book I've mentioned before, is an Italian novel, not novel, Italian memoir about basically walking home from the Eastern Front after the collapse of the front along the Don, and in the middle of winter too. But all the Civil War books I've read are like, a tour of the Mississippi Valley. Those tend to be more interesting than a tour of Virginia. Virginia is kind of like overly familiar and not very interesting. But
I would add a Naipaul, the Area of
yeah,
Darkness. You might have even been the one that introduced. I know you introduced me to Biswas, House for Biswas.
yeah,
An Area of Darkness has hit me hard. Biswas hit me in one way. It's a funnier book, but Area of Darkness is so personal,
yeah.
very painful. Just had I don't know, really powerful effect. And that is essentially like a travel book. He wrote a travel book before that. Naipaul did, called The Middle Passage, and I think he was contracted to do this. He went to sort of some of the islands in the Caribbean. It wasn't that good, and I think it's because I didn't like it that much, and I think it wasn't that great. It was well written and so on, but it didn't make an effect on me because it wasn't personal. And
well, you told me something else about that book, and I think it's very likely that you said at one point Naipaul was talking about these opium-addicted Indian workers who'd been imported by the empire to this this Caribbean island, and at some point Naipaul just said, "I can't do this. I'm going to get depressed, and I'm pro-empire, so I'm going to stop doing this."
That's true. Yeah, he didn't. I mean, he was much more. What I like about An Area of Darkness was he was very hard on himself, really hard on India and Indians, raging against sort of sentimental, romantic Indiaphilia. He had to get it out of his system. He became very much more positive, like by A Million Mutinies Now and the later
A Million Mutinies Now, by the way, is a great book, really good. Yeah. And it's if you're not sold on Naipaul because he's too depressing, it's kind of a happy book as much as Naipaul can ever be happy. It's like saying India's popping right now, everybody's getting uppity, and that's good.
Yeah, he kind of got all of the anger and the hatred out of his system, and maybe even felt a little bad about it. I don't know. His book Among the Believers, it's a very good book. It was attacked at the time for being very Islamophobic, and it's not Islamophobic, I would say. I mean, it's snotty and nasty, and he's a nasty person. But there's a lot that sticks with you, particularly in the Iran section, where he's hanging out with a Tudeh, right, the young communist student, and just seeing that he's right there as the revolution is turning from the sort of the secularist leftist to to the Islamist revolution. I found that interesting. He's a pretty loathsome character in it, but he's so smart. I was actually I was pleased to see that Pankaj Mishra, who is a great writer too, came out, because he savages Naipaul in his last novel. Naipaul he goes out of his way. He knows where to hurt him, like talking about his paunch and his like how vain Naipaul is at some party and he looks like a pelican. Like he's really going after him in low ways. But and I could tell, I was like, okay, this is kill your idol stuff. I mean, I know that Mishra comes from the left and Naipaul from the, right, I guess. But Mishra then in an interview said that it was an area of darkness that changed his life basically as a writer. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, but if whatever war you're interested in, unless it's World War I or Ukraine, there's going to be some movement. And when people move across a landscape, there's going to be something interesting. So it's going to be a travel book.
Xenophon. I mean, Xenophon, talk about travel and war. Kapuscinski. I mean, I see him as kind of in that, in a way, your book, Erdogan Pizza, kind of reminds me, it's like the inverse of Kapuscinski in a sense. Like there's a similar sensibility, but Kapuscinski is very connected to people, but he has a great inner world as well. And yours is inner world, outer world, through the inner world. I don't know. It's not as social, I guess.
But he's also very stoical and I'm not very stoical. Like, he has malaria centered in the brain at one point, and he gives you about a half page on it. And Catherine always gets really annoyed because sometimes we're lying in bed and say, read me that bit about the brain malaria. and it's always too short. But not too short for Catherine. It's quite long enough for her, but it's too short for me.
Well, I still remember, John, Malaysia, 1996.
Oh God.
Okay, but I mean, it was another one.
A little hypocritical because you know why? Because I had stopped taking my antidepressants because I thought they might interfere with the paradise of opiates that I might find in Southeast Asia. Instead, it was, speaking of Islamists, it was under a combined U.S. anti-drug and Islamist regime, and you could not get codeine if you were screaming in agony. So that I was off my antidepressants for no reason, and part of that was thinking, well, apparently I'm dying. I don't know why I thought that, but I did.
I thought you had dengue fever or something, or I guess that's what going off antidepressants is like. Like having
that's all
fever.
It was, and it was my first time on tricyclics, which are very, very serious. The kind you can kill yourself with. And I didn't know what it would be like to go off them. But that reminds me of what motivated, and I'll be honest about it, a lot of my earlier travels was, where the hell can I get some opiates? And I was looking for love, as it were, in all the wrong places, because you would be much better off in a Western city if you had a few social skills, which I did not, than anywhere in Asia in that world. But I remember the first time I was in Asia with this woman I was going out with at the time, and she had done her opiate stuff and wasn't really that interested in pushing on.
She was moving on to Pentagon contracting. That's another story.
But I believed, I believed that there was a place where I could be tranquil and happy, and it was called opiates. So I read the guidebooks. I walked around every Thai city at night, and I never got anything. So finally, I was in the north of Thailand, and so again, this is the most dangerous thing you have ever done in your travels. I took a pickup truck with benches in the back, which is a Southeast Asian way of getting around. I was the only non-local worker in there, so I kind of stood out. It's like, hi guys, how you doing? And I took this up to a mountain peak, like almost cartoonishly mountain peak. And we went past army outposts, and we went past some very strange villages of nationalist Chinese that were probably a drug militia, and the Thai army was stationed outside there, and I didn't know what it all meant. But we got to the Akha guest house. The Akha are an ethnic group in extreme north of Thailand, and there was something about how the Akha were real specialists in opium growing, and I drove myself there, and I get out of the truck at this peak, nothing else around, just other high peaks, empty. And I go into the guest house, and there's one guy sort of lackadaisically behind the counter. And I think, well, okay, now you're here. What are you going to do? And
get back on the bus and go home.
Yeah. Well, I said, I walked up to him. I gathered my courage, which always takes a few seconds, if not years, and walked up to the counter and said, "Do you have opium?"
So suave, man.
Yeah. Oh, suave and boner. And he blinked a couple of times because he's a Thai, and he doesn't get excited in a visible way. And he said, "Opium, no." And I said, "Good." like I was a DEA
Just checking. You passed. Here's your certificate.
Yeah. So on very wobbly legs, I walked out of that place, and I just started walking back down the mountain. And the scariest moment of that entire trip, which pretty much abounded in scary moments, was when I heard gravel crackling behind me, and I, like one who on a lonesome road in that Coleridge thing, because he knows a fearful fiend doth close behind him tread. I finally turned around and looked, and it was a Thai police car moving very slowly at about walking pace, so that it was just sort of pacing me. And I thought, well, Thai prison could be interesting.
Get a good memoir out of that.
Yeah. And all the same, knowing that I could not survive a week in a Thai prison. And so I just sort of wobbly legged on down the mountain, and the gravel crunched louder and louder and louder. And it got at its loudest, and then the truck pulled ahead of me, and it was escorting a bunch of tourist cars down the mountain. And it just, I don't know what they thought. Like, oh yeah, there's a guy walking down this mountain in this militarized zone where nobody ever goes or is allowed to go. But they just walked past me, and my legs kind of wobbled some more, and I giggled hysterically. And of course, I learned nothing.
I'd be careful of landmines. That's something with the KMT.
Oh, I wasn't that advanced. I was still young enough not to have any sense of self-preservation.
Yeah, of course. Somebody asked about the recently discovered saline war book. I'm looking forward to reading that. I don't know. I know it came out in French. My French definitely is nowhere near good. I actually looked at it and I thought, my French used to be decent enough to read the newspapers, but not saline.
No, it's archaic slang, and it's hard.
But speaking of travel, Journey to the End of the Night, Voyage.
That's right.
Yeah, that has a lot of great travel in it. Somebody asked a couple questions here. Let me just see. Somebody had asked if we're going to do an EP on Limonov's literary career as well, and we should do something more on Limonov. I'm glad to see people are interested. People. I mean, he's one of a kind, and not, he's not an angel and never pretended to be, and but a really interesting figure and a great writer and poet. So yeah, we should do more. We should do something specifically on that. And we could probably even get somebody who worked with him to join us for that.
Yeah.
Somebody asked about any thoughts on a future EP on the militarization of space / Star Wars. I think that's a really good topic. I mean, especially, John, you probably heard that there was a brief, I don't know, hullabaloo out here, that Russia was apparently going to introduce little flying nukes up into space to knock out, which would be able to knock out satellites, and of course, so much communications and intelligence, everything in the US, well, pretty much everywhere, relies on the satellites. I mean, I have to admit, I found the freak out kind of weird. It was sort of like, there's a treaty on that, and we're not supposed to violate this treaty. And the Russians said they're not violating it. But it was just so strange because we've been breaking every treaty with the Russians. And I'm not saying the Russians are angels or anything, but like, we did start that by pulling out of the ABM treaty in 2002. And, and we've broken a few treaties since then. And we're kind of,
I think there's this weird double standard in the American press that they accept that America is permanently bipolar because it's bipartisan. Like, a new administration comes in and it immediately undoes everything the other administration did within the very tight limits of the consensus. Whereas Russia is seen as a timeless authoritarian place where if it ever changes its mind, that's somehow uniquely treacherous.
Right. And
so this is an interesting question. Let's see here. Where was that? Nice ominous question. What's the most off place you have ever been? Like, you feel a bad thing is about to happen or has happened, and you're just there and it's just below the surface. Mark?
Yeah. I would have to say, the first time I went to Albania, but it changed so much after that. So I went to Albania in 2000, and the 90s were very bad for Albania. Like, it was just, a lot of countries, of course, were stripped, but a lot of countries had more to strip from. I mean, we just, we did our episode with Volodymyr Yushchenko about Ukraine and, the demodernization, but Ukraine was so so modernized that it's nothing like Albania. When I landed there, just seemed like another universe, and it felt, rightly or wrongly, and this is after having come from Russia and spending time out in that part of the world. It felt pretty weird and a little bit menacing. And part of that was just because I knew nothing. I knew so little about it. The language went nowhere because Albania has its own language, totally separate from the sort of, anything Slavic. Because of course, throughout a lot of the Balkans, if you know Russian or some Slavic, you'll be able to get by. You'll be able to read at least, and sort of get by.
Yeah, they won't like it.
Yeah,
they much prefer showing off their English, especially
yes.
now. Man, God, they're, especially Montenegro, they are fluent, but they can speak Russian even if they don't want to.
Yeah. But Albania wasn't like that. It was very strange. I remember landing at the airport there, and I'd never seen an airport like this. It was, it just, it felt like I'd gone back several decades. And the truth is, there was really nothing to be worried about. I mean, everyone was really nice, and Albania, Tirana turned out to be like this totally booming great city. I've heard nothing but great things about Tirana since then. So it may have just been, also just crashing from whatever shit I was doing in Moscow before I arrived there, and just a complete depletion of neurochemicals.
Yeah, well, travel does that anyway.
Yeah.
And if you've got some other chemical going, it does it worse.
I mean, generally showing up in a place that's menacing has always been pretty inspiring to me.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I haven't really felt that absolute dread. I've just been to a lot of weird places and out of the way places, but they're always generally kind of thrilling. What
Yeah.
about you?
Uh, yeah, I've had the kind of experience you're describing. In fact, the first time I went to Moscow to meet you in the early '90s, that Moscow airport experience was terrifying,
Yeah.
and it was like, thieves' world come to life. But actually, there was nothing to be afraid of. It's
Yeah.
like some guys are trying to make a little money by offering you taxi rides, and they might charge you a little more than the going rate. Like, ooh, scary.
Yeah.
But it certainly looked scary at the time. But then there was Saudi, first experience of
Mm,
Saudi. That was different because I thought I knew the Middle East because we had been in Kurdistan, which, aside from the fact that I was dying of anemia at the time, was a really nice place. And I thought that would immunize us to any further Middle Eastern experiences. I should have known, like when this woman who hired foreign language teachers for Saudi interviewed me on the phone, I said, "Oh, we've been to Kurdistan," and she screamed, "Kurdistan is nothing like Saudi Arabia."
uh,
And I thought, okay, I just want to get a job,
yeah.
but there was a reason she said that. I'm still thinking, was Najran more alien than Riyadh? In a way, Najran was, it's 6 miles from Yemen, so it's very remote. It's very difficult. And one of my fellow teachers was killed in the street by a speeding car a few days after we arrived. So that was kind of alienating. But in a way, Riyadh was much more alien and malign because I saw cars jump up on the sidewalk to try to hit foreigners now and then. Most
Mm,
often, they were not Anglo foreigners, they were South Asian
mm.
foreigners who had no status and whom you could abuse safely. But it was a scary place.
Yeah. I remember you came back, speaking of like walking and thin, you came back from there very thin and in great shape because you had to do an enormous amount of walking when you were there in
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia. And it must have just been hot as all hell too. But I have to say, as horrible as Saudi Arabia may have always been in the moment, no alcohol, uh, not allowed to walk with your wife, right?
Yeah.
And things like that. But it gave you a lot of really useful insights. I mean,
Oh, it was
um,
a blessing.
yeah,
I mean, of all the places we could have gone, not just Saudi Arabia, but Najran,
yes, yes.
a beautiful city. And there was another question, in fact, about weird people you've met in your travels. And the best thing about Najran, in some ways, was that we got to meet at least three locals who were fascinating people, and several other fellow English teachers who were very mixed bag, but also interesting. I mean, I met this guy who was probably crazy, and he did kind of go crazy at the end. But he was this African immigrant who had taught himself English by listening to the radio and was hired by the army as some sort of computer expert, also self-taught, uh, and sort of adopted me and Catherine, and later got his feelings hurt because we weren't waiting at a certain place on a given day. But he talked amazing stories about what it was like for him, and it wasn't all great. It wasn't all believable. Like once, uh, he told me he'd had 3 heart attacks in a few months, and I said,
Jeez.
"What? How did that happen?"
Mm.
And he said, "Well, I think it's witchcraft." And
Ooh,
I
wow.
thought, okay, you're really weird. And I later realized It wasn't that weird. Everybody around me believed in witchcraft.
Wow. Um, Somebody asked if either of us read Yelena Kostyuchenko's new book. I haven't read it, but I do know her because she was with Nova Gazeta. In fact, so God, this would have been over 10 years ago. I wrote about Kostyuchenko's so in, I think it was like December of 2012. It was, I believe, that would have been like what, the 20th anniversary or something for Kazakhstan's dictators, independence, rule, whatever, over Kazakhstan. And I don't know, just make a long story sort of shortish. Kazakhstan was very close with us because of Chevron and because of the Afghanistan war, which was Obama's pet war. And the oil workers there were on strike against the main oil company because they were getting shafted and their union had sold them out. And they were tough as nails, these Kazakh oil workers in the West. And I wrote about, so there was a massacre. They interrupted or messed with in the far west of the country on the Caspian Sea sort of area. They messed with Independence Day celebration, and they literally wound up getting massacred. And there were videos out briefly before. It was the first time I ever saw how the government could fully shut down internet, YouTube, social media, was in Kazakhstan, because some people had from their windows filmed. It was really chilling. Lines of Kazakh police. You'd see people running, demonstrators running, and then you'd see these police come in, and all of a sudden you hear the crackling of almost like musket fire from the Civil War, just like that. And then you'd see people falling down, and then police going up to people who are down, beating the dead and beating the wounded and shooting them again. And officially, the Kazakh government said 15 people died. And that just seemed preposterous, just based on video evidence. But no one, excuse me, no one was reporting it at all. No one, because this was not an official enemy state. This is an official friendly state. Kazakhstan, we did an episode on Kazakhstan anyway. So Yelena Kostyuchenko from Nova Gazeta, the city was sealed off where this took place. And Kostyuchenko went there as the only outside reporter that I know of who went there. There were no reporters really that interested in going. The Kazakh regime made it very hard for reporters to get in, and I think people were fine to keep it that way, except for Yelena. And she went in and she interviewed people. She interviewed people who saw the morgue, saw the bodies, and she came away estimating, and not just her, but people in the Kazakh labor movement estimating that at least 70 that she could be reliant on. At least 70 were killed, probably closer to 100, and at least 500 wounded, maybe up to 1,000. And so when she posted that, I wrote it up on the Exiled Online because I was just so shocked how little interest anybody had in it. And I wanted to get it out there. And I got immediately attacked of all people by this sort of blog site. I think it was called Registan, about Central Asian politics. And it was run by Joshua Faust.
Oh,
you
yeah,
remember
that
him?
guy.
Yeah, Joshua Faust, who was like this Northrop Grumman military intelligence contractor. His buddy Casey Mitchell, that's Michael Weiss's banner boy, and Sarah Kendzior.
Oh my God,
I
that's
know,
a
huh?
name.
And
Yeah.
and somebody else. And Faust used he had a column through the Atlantic to attack me as somebody who doesn't know anything, doesn't know what he's talking about. I don't think Faust even knows Russian, but he'd spent time as a spook in the Peace Corps or something. I think he and Casey Mitchell in Kazakhstan. And so he attacked me in the Atlantic Monthly. And that's why I just thought, I'm so tired of this shit. So I just did a deep dive into Joshua Faust, looking into him. But I also went back and explained why what Yelena Kostyuchenko wrote had a lot of merit to it. And then somebody else from that Registan came out and said they basically did this whole very sexist attack on Yelena Kostyuchenko. Like they quoted some old sexist like Russian aphorism, Baba. Like it's like basically chicks are better left to discuss gossip. I was so shocked. Like this is in the Obama era. You didn't do that kind of stuff. And these guys were supposed to be liberals, you know, nominally liberals. And so
but as I recall, you did a classic nuclear attack.
I did
on Faust,
because I was just so sick of all that. You know, I was so sick by that point of so much corruption in the U.S. media, and it's so goddamn corrupt, and it was tiresome to deal with. And you know, a little coda to the story. The funny sort of coda to this. Guess who came to Faust's defense when I went after Faust? Glenn Greenwald, and he started, you know, saying that my attack on him was like the worst thing in you know, journalism, because he didn't like me, and you know, and so he wrote this whole thing, and then somebody pointed out to Glenn that on Exiled Online, I mean, this is our policy, we would change comments because we realized that all commenting was also potentially corrupted by think tank goons and so on. So we would go in and, as we called it, improve people's comments below our stories. Yeah. And we improved them a lot. And when Glenn found out that we changed comments, he wrote out that it was the most unethical thing he'd ever seen in all of journalism.
Yeah.
That's Glenn. I actually like Glenn all right now. I mean, he is who he is, and he does some good stuff. But he was insufferable back then.
Well, he's insufferable depending on the angle that you encounter him. I mean, he still is. He's he's still a humorless guy who believes what he learned in ninth grade civics, but you know, within that limit, he has his principles. But this links to a question that someone had. What are some shady characters you've encountered while traveling, e.g., CIA types? And I think we've had a lot of experience with people who were definitely spies, probably spies, and more importantly, a whole category of people that don't get a lot of coverage, like wannabe part-timey spies or spy groupies or something.
The first story that comes to my head, it's actually really funny. This would be 1998, sort of the spring of 1998. I think we had lost like two of our American sales managers, and we hadn't gone Russian just yet. And when we did go Russian, everything finally got better. And for a brief period, some guy came to us and said to Matt, Taby, and me, and said, I'd like to help you guys out however I can. Which, you know, if you read about spies and informants and stuff, they always make themselves very useful. And this guy was very, like, weirdly straight-laced looking. Like he looked like I don't, you know, in Animal House, the president, I don't like frats or anything, but I do like the movie Animal House. The president of Belushi's frat, like he was kind of preppy and
he was the one presentable
innocent
type.
Yeah.
He
looked a lot like that, but he wasn't. And he said that he had resigned from the State Department, and he liked what we did, and he wanted to help out somehow. And he just sat there and observed us for like a week or two. And what you would see is basically a cross between Beavis and Butthead and With Nail and I or something. And it was, and I'm sure what he wound up coming, and he was just like spying on us because, you know, at that time, the Exile wound up becoming the center of, and targeted by, I mean, look, Russia's transformation was the central mission of American foreign policy in the 1990s, and it ended in complete catastrophe and Putin, because Clinton fucked it up. And the Exile, weirdly enough, because of who we were and where we were, was the only one. I mean, we read the Russian press, like we were the only ones calling out what an absolute catastrophe the American, you know, project with Yeltsin was there. And so I heard from various people, I heard this for years. People assumed we had to have been spies. I heard people saying we had to have been CIA spies and that we were a controlled opposition. You know, and I know, and I've been accused, like by Anders Osland, still will come out and say he knows that I was run by the FSB, and we were, you know, out to destroy like America's good influence there and so on. It was, and I think it was just weird to people because it was actually easier to get the story right than you'd imagine. All you'd have to do is not just open your eyes and talk to Russians,
Yeah.
you know, and read the Russian press. It was easier than
Yeah.
you'd think. And so I think this
And
guy,
well, and I think you had to be a little bit alienated from
yes,
the American experience or the Western experience, which is surprisingly difficult for
yeah,
a lot of people.
yeah. So
That's
this,
what they couldn't handle.
yeah. So this guy who looked totally out of place just sat there watching us, you know, just being just goofs and then but putting together these issues. And he just sort of, after a couple of weeks, he just stopped showing up. And I mean, I'm sure his reports back were like, um, you know, it's hard to imagine these guys are run by a spy agency or whatever, because they're constantly snorting things and giggling like nonstop. And I just can't take being around them anymore because they're just unbelievably, they're unbearable
They should have put
assholes.
a disability claim.
I know. I think we gave him Havana syndrome, you know, of some kind. So, but yeah, that was the most kind of obvious spy guy I ever saw, and I didn't care. So what if he was there watching us? Like, you can't hide from them. People,
No.
I'm going to get this crypto, you know, thing and then double layer, blah blah blah. No, I always assume, and this was, you know, something also taught to me by Russian friends of mine who became powerful for a while, and some of them didn't make it, who, you know, knew the security services well. And it was like, look, you're not going to, if they want to watch you, they're going to watch you. And so the more you kind of try to hide things, well, you look scared and they can still follow you anyway. And the thing is to let them know always that you're not influenced by them watching you. You're not scared, you know, and they'll respect you more, and they're still going to watch you one way or another. So
Yeah.
yeah.
The thing that scared me was, and this is not just in the exile era, but a lot of different contexts. When you combine illegal things, then it gets
Yes.
difficult. Like when you combine drugs and a program that is politically unpopular with the people who rule,
Yeah.
that's a very dangerous thing.
Yeah.
And I had experiences of that with Irish Northern Aid as well, and that was really terrifying.
Yes.
But even with Irish Northern Aid, long ago I said to people, because a lot of these guys were not, I don't know, they weren't that sharp in some ways, and they were obsessed with spies and things, and I just said, we're not doing anything. We're a pressure group. We operate above ground. There's nothing secret here. Anybody can, I mean, as long as they help, you know, staple things together and help print out the pamphlets that we're doing, good. Let them be spies. They'll help. But then, you know, in various projects that have a lot of government influence, I met people who were probably spies, but like in Kurdistan, the 1 year I did in Kurdistan, there were a couple of people who really, really wanted to know what sources I had for War Nerd columns, and I didn't have anything clever to tell them, you know, like I try to read different papers and things and try to guess who's lying, and they hated that answer. They hated that answer, and
Yeah.
they just hung around me and then got really frustrated. That's one thing I'll say about spies. If you don't have some secret to inform on, they get really angry.
Yes.
So
They're,
they just
they're
want
paranoid too, and they look for things to confirm their paranoid and extremely dark view of the world and how people sort of operate. Yeah, I don't know. I've known some spies and met some spies, and I just personally, I haven't been impressed really, but when I think of
No.
people who've impressed me, I mean, to be honest, people have impressed me a lot more, even though, they do horrible things and so on, are like some really kind of more powerful, I don't know, corporate lawyers or bankers that I've met. Like they kind of can overwhelm you with the intensity of what they're focused on narrowly, but their sort of intellectual intensity.
Yeah, and they've been through it. I
Yeah.
mean, they're like those elephant seals that dive to incredible depths. They've been under a lot of pressure.
Yeah. Um, right. So, I don't know, John, I think,
I
we
think we've
actually
done
went on an
enough.
hour and a half, yeah, or more
Yeah,
even, I guess.
done
Yeah.
enough for a
It's kind of
Malapup, as they
fun though.
say. Yeah.
I really, it's, we'll get this down. I promise y'all,
Mhm.
we will get this down. So it'll be a little bit smoother next time. But I like this. I like being able to sort of, communicate. It's kind of cool
Yeah.
with people. And we could do future episodes with guests or without guests, but talking about specific subjects or a World of Wars. We could maybe do a World of Wars episode
Interactive. Yeah, that's a good idea.
with people, yeah, and try our best. Anyway, well, thanks everyone
Thanks,
for joining
everybody. Yeah,
us.
that was
Yeah,
really fun.
yeah.
Okay.
I know it's late where you are, John. So,
Yeah.
all right, Brendan, are you there?
Yes, sir.
You folks all hear our man Brendan there. That's the famous Brendan. Um, Brendan, how do we? So do we just?
I was just about to stop it. So thanks,
Ah, okay.
everyone.
All right.